The whole thing of video games based off movies is something that's always been a slippery slope, and it's a crossover that seldom works. I don't think we've all forgotten how Batman Forever turned out, right? It seems to work best when a developer takes the general concept and themes of a film and works off that to create their own content. Kinda like what happened with GoldenEye 64, Chronicles of Riddick, and case in point, King Kong. Oh, I'm sorry, Peter Jackson's King Kong, the official video game adaptation of the movie. Yeah, that's a bit of a mouthful. Anyway, King Kong was a game created in collaboration with the filmmakers and developers Ubisoft Pictures, the same guys who created the Rayman series and more recently Assassin's Creed Odyssey. It was released in 2005 around the same time as the film for Microsoft Windows, Xbox 360, PlayStation 3 with ports for the PlayStation 2, Nintendo DS and even the PSP. Yeah, this thing got around more than Miley Cyrus. Plot-wise, it's pretty much the same. A filmmaker named Carl Denham takes a film crew to the mysterious Skull Island to shoot a film he hopes is going to be a huge success, with an actress named Anne Darrow and his screenwriter Jack Driscoll who the player controls. Jack Black, Adrian Brody and Bayomi Watts all return to voice their respective characters. Now obviously their performances aren't really Oscar worthy, but it's nice to hear them reprise their roles.
Scream and scream for your life!
Now, I can't imagine there's too many people who don't know what happens next, but in case you somehow missed out on watching the films, things go that they come across the giant eponymous gorilla Kong. Anne gets captured and Jack and the others try to rescue her before escaping the island. All whilst being attacked by the natives, dinosaurs and so many insects and bugs that it's going to make you want to turn the game off and surface spray your entire house. And of course, Kong shows up every now and then to throw a spanner in the works, but I couldn't hate this guy if I tried. He's as likable as he was in the film, and if a bunch of tiny people came into my house and started trying to shoot a movie without giving me a cut of the profits, well, I'd probably be pissed off too. King Kong was an absolute arsehole of a game to get running, and even when I finally did get it going, I still had to deal with a warped aspect ratio and a letterbox around the screen, at the game's attempt of making the whole thing more cinematic. Once you turn all that stuff off though by patching it out, which is easy enough to do, you'll notice just how gorgeous the game can look at times despite its age. Technically it might be a bit dated, textures can look blurry and some of the modelling is a bit sloppy, but it's the way the environments have been created that I still think stands the test of time. You're always finding yourself in these very unique and varied locations, and every single area you move through has a real handcrafted feel to it. Landmarks are frequent and eye-catching, not to mention jaw-dropping, and they always serve as a way to attract your gaze to a point of interest, which helps a lot during the game's many scripted sequences.
Look out!
Some of these moments are just incredibly tense too, whether it be one of the dozen or so times you're attacked by giant insects or crabs, or later in the game when you're chased down rapids by two dinosaurs at once. It's the kind of thing that's still impressive to this day, and the way that it's been pulled off here near flawlessly at times is a real testament to how much time and effort must have gone into creating these kind of segments. The island in this game is more than just a pretty backdrop too, it's basically its own ecosystem, with all manner of flora and fauna that are more happy to attack whatever gets in their way, be it the player, other NPCs, or even other creatures. A big feature of the game is how you can lure enemies away by baiting them to corpses or by attracting them with food, at which point they'll ignore you for a period of time and happily munch on whatever happens to be available. You'll also have to use fire frequently as a way to burn down thick patches of bush, which becomes a pretty regular mechanic throughout the game, and also just as a way to dispel enemies. The bulk of the game though has you playing as Jack Driscoll, where it plays like a first-person shooter, just without any kind of UI and a few weird control mechanics. So there's no health bar, there's no ammo counter, no map, no radar, no bullet time, no semen meter, none of that shit. It's a minimalistic interface very reminiscent of an earlier dinosaur-themed game like Jurassic Park Trespasser. And just like that game, you're very limited in what you're able to run around with. So you can only ever carry one weapon at a time, be it a Luger pistol, a shotgun, Tommy gun, or a rifle. And a lot like Trespasser, the only way to know how much remaining ammo you have is by hearing Jack say it out loud.
Around 30 bullets on backup.
To fire a gun, you press spacebar to bring it up, and then you can aim down the sights with the right mouse button. When you're out of bullets, about all you can do is use the weapon to bludgeon something to death, but at that point you're better off finding something else. Ammo isn't entirely all that common, but it's always there when you need it. Other than that, you can pick up any nearby sharp, pointy thing and use it as a weapon, which also works pretty well. This can be some kind of sharp bone, which is in pretty much total abundance and does minimal damage, or an actual spear, which is less frequent but seems to hit a lot harder. And I gotta say, there is something kinda cool about throwing a spear through a dinosaur's head. These controls can feel pretty clunky at times, and it's definitely not the smoothest shooting game ever made, but it functions well enough. And I think once you get used to the idea of pressing the spacebar before firing a weapon, it's fine. Jack isn't a space marine or an undead gunslinger, so he's not the most resilient dude around. And as a rule of thumb, it usually seems you can take only 2 hits from enemies before buying the farm. Usually that first hit's gonna put you into this critical state where the screen pulses red like someone's hit you in the face with a can of diced tomatoes. And then after a few seconds, if you can avoid another hit, your health regenerates and your wounds magically heal themselves. It's almost like the game goes into slow motion or something before you get hit, as enemies often pause for what feels like a second or so before dealing damage, giving you plenty of time to fire back or just move out of the way. Thing is though, even if you are killed, the checkpoints are really generous and about all you're going to lose is like the last 5 minutes of your time, and a little bit of patience. And having said that, I don't really think this is a particularly hard game. I mean, it's definitely challenging, but it's never unfair or cheap. Most of the time I failed a chapter was when one of my buddies got killed by something and I couldn't help them in time. There's times when you basically have to babysit the AI and help them get through somewhere pretty much unscathed, which just involves killing things before they can harm them. Most of the times you're playing as Kong usually involves fighting something else whilst having to keep an eye on Anne in the background, who's got her own problems to deal with. And if Anne or one of your AI buddies dies when you're playing as Jack, it's game over. You lose, good day sir. It's a shame the short segments where you control Kong aren't as good as they could have been. I think controlling Kong when he moves is neat, like running around, swinging from branches and all that kind of thing just looks awesome. But as soon as you have to fight something, you're gonna notice that it's really sloppy. There is something kind of awesome about beating the shit out of a T-Rex and ripping its jaw apart, I won't lie. And realistically, this is how combat between 2 titans like this would probably play out. But complex, it is not. Sound design plays a big part in this too, and the loud thundering effects when you're running around and leaping from branch to branch, and the heavy thuds of Kong's fist pounding something to submission is just really awesome. But about all you can do is just mash the left mouse button and trade blows with whatever else you're up against. If it's a smaller enemy, you kill them in a single hit. But bigger enemies like dinosaurs you have to beat to a pulp before you can then do some kind of finishing move to execute them. Then Kong lets out this huge roar and pounds his chest like a frat boy, and you get to do it all over again. Making this process a lot less tedious requires you to enter a fury mode, which is done by spinning the mouse wheel down as quickly as possible. But I found this is really finicky and just doesn't work all that great on the mouse. I'm assuming on consoles this was done by spinning the analog stick around really quickly, which is something that's far easier to pull off. Thing is though, you're gonna need this mechanic. In fact, I think it's kinda mandatory when you're taking on multiple enemies. I find that some of the Kong sections aren't really well explained either, like the very first big enemy you take on is this giant flying dinosaur thing, and before this thing attacks you for the first time, an on-screen prompt tells you to do a dash move. Why it does this though, I've got no idea, because all you need to do is hit the dinosaur at the right time with a basic attack. I didn't realise this at first though, and I spent half a dozen retries attempting to do this stupid dash move the game was telling me to do and getting nowhere. These are still fun to some extent though, and the segments where you're frantically chasing after Anne to protect her or just interacting with her on some level are just really enjoyable to watch.
Bitch! I love you!
And I love the last couple of chapters when you're loose on the streets of New York City and can climb up buildings and throw cars at people. Like, that might be some of the most fun I've had in gaming in recent memory, even though it only lasts a couple of minutes. Sadly though, I found the game crashed in a few of these Kong chapters for some reason, and it was always at the same spots, which meant the only way I could get past this was to download a save file from the internet to progress onward. All up, Kong has 38 chapters, but the length of these chapters can vary quite a bit. Some of them might take 10 or 15 minutes and are super challenging, whereas others are almost completely pointless, with little to no gameplay, and they almost serve as interactive cinematics. And sometimes these ones honestly last no longer than a minute. After you finish the game though, you can replay all of the chapters to get high scores, which unlocks an alternative ending, and it also unlocks bonus content in the main menu. Like this interview with Peter Jackson, who makes it pretty clear he's a huge fan of gaming, and he also emphasises how open they were when working with Ubisoft. It's even to the point where he says that some of the content in this game is stuff they were forced to remove from the film, but now it's been able to be reworked back in, so that's pretty awesome. If I had to pick a top 5 for video games based off films, I'd say that King Kong is easily up there, without a doubt, especially if you limited it to first-person shooters. My major takeaway from this whole thing was that whenever I was playing it, I just found it hard to put down. I kept wanting to get to the next scripted sequence, the next time I could shoot a bunch of millipedes, or the next time I could pulverize someone as Kong. And even though the mechanics are often repeated, I just never found it repetitive or boring. Collaborating with Peter Jackson gives the game a much more official and authentic experience, and there's a level of production value that's seldom seen in video games based off movies.
I give you Toph, the eighth wonder of the world!
I think people forget about the unique Ubisoft games like this. Instead, we seem to dwell on the series they've worked on, like Rayman, Assassin's Creed, Rainbow Six, Far Cry, Watch Dogs, Splinter Cell, Prince of Persia, Assassin's Creed again, and so on. And as a result, titles like this one seem to slip under the radar as they're overshadowed by bigger and more advertised IPs. And whilst it's too early to say if some of their more recent games are going to stand the test of time, I think King Kong is a game that has. So you know what, I like this game, and if it wasn't such a prick to get running on modern hardware, I'd recommend it easily. Sadly, it seems time has been a cruel mistress to this thing, and the few times I tried to get it running on Windows 7, it pretty much broke everything on my computer. But if you can get it on console, or you're willing to brave installing it, you'll find one of the best film-based video games ever made, and one that I think is still a blast to play in our current year. Overall, I found the journey to Skull Island an enjoyable one. Just next time I go, I'll be sure to bring along a big can of Mortein.